Should we start now? Hey everyone, while you're kind of listening to this intro, if you want to just put in the chat where you're from, we'd love to see where everyone's coming from tonight. I think we probably have some people from San Diego and obviously Denver and all over right now. So put that in the chat. And that's also a great place where you can put your questions. So if you have any questions throughout the night, feel free to chat those up. And Ryan and Chelsea and I will try to look at that throughout the night and get Taryn to answer those questions for you. So welcome. We are the Denver UX Newbies Meetup group. If you don't already know where you are right now. Our mission basically is to find and provide educational opportunities to our group members and friends. So we're excited to have Taryn here tonight to help us learn about how to make our first UX project a success. So if you don't already know, I'm Lene, and we have Ryan and Chelsea on the call as well who help coordinate the group. If you ever want to reach out to us on LinkedIn or anywhere else, feel free to do so. Our next event coming up is August 13th. We'll have Keon from Facebook presenting on how to present your work. We also have a really cool event coming up in September that we're planning. It's going to be a 2-night event of some like short UX talks just about different things that you can do in UX, and that'll be with ServiceNow. So look forward to those events coming up, and we'll have some more information for you shortly. Our group is sponsored by Adobe, if you didn't already know that. So we have Adobe XD is a really great tool to use if you haven't tried it yet already. I highly suggest giving that a try. I know they have some really great new features now, so try that out. We also do cross promotions with the San Diego Experience Design community. So we have a great event coming up for them. It's on July 29th, and it will be with Blink, Heidi Atkinson from Blink, and she will be doing a really cool workshop on object modeling. So feel free to check that out. I'm going to check it out for sure. I heard it's going to be really awesome. And then next up, so I've talked about this before, but there's a really cool class for UX at ACC, the Arapahoe Community College here in Denver. And they will be doing this class again in September. And it'll be like a hybrid of virtual and in-person courses. And that's kind of the plan for now. And the last day to register for that is August 30th. So check out that group discussion board on our Meetup group if you want some more information on that. And then after tonight's event, we will be doing a kind of happy hour networking session. So please stick around if you can, but no pressure. Totally understand. You probably have other places to be tonight, but we'd love to see you there if you can make it. So that's all I have for you tonight. So Taryn Lambert. She's a user experience and design consultant with 7 years of experience. Her background includes agency experience, teaching UX, and working in-house at startups. So I'll have her tell you a little bit more about herself, and that's what we'll do. Oh, I actually have this whole thing for you, but if anyone wants to quickly jot down any of that information, I'll give you a second here. And then Taryn can kind of start preparing her talk. All right, Taryn, you are up.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me. It's been great working with you to get this set up. Let me share my screen. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So welcome everybody. You're here to learn how to make your first UX project successful. I left the word UX out of my title, I'm just realizing, but this is about UX. My background is in UX, so we'll go a little bit into that. Here's the agenda first before we do that. So we'll have a little intro. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Then we'll do an activity first, and then we will have an opportunity for groups to present what they came up with during that activity. We'll kind of review, have a little bit of discussion, and I'll go into a little bit more detail around that, and then we'll have a Q&A. So that's the general setup, and we'll try to stick to those times. But I know that sometimes I can sway off schedule a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. So first up, I'm Taryn. As I said, user designer, strategist. I definitely deal mostly with the very first part of projects. I'm anywhere from like the research side, focused in qualitative research, all the way up into wireframes. But if I could drop wireframing, I would do that as well. And it just depends on the project. I can do visual design and UI work, but it's just never going to be as good as somebody that is like a true UI designer. So I like to hand it off to a visual designer once I have my wireframes. And what I like also doing is working with the business and figuring out what their actual long-term strategy is, because then that can support how they're going to grow their product and actually be successful with their UX. That's just a little bit about me. I started my profession in UX at an agency. I worked there for about 3 years. Then I went and I taught user experience design. And then I went to a startup and did research and design for them. I consulted for 2 years because I just wanted the freedom, realized that that was, you know, a lot to learn there. And there was definitely a lot of knowledge that you get from doing something like that and working with a lot of different companies. And then for the last few years, I've probably actually only, I guess, a year and a half-ish, I've been contracting with a few different companies. And the last one was Microsoft. And so something that I've started realizing as I work with companies for shorter amounts of time is there's a lot of different patterns that come up of how you can set up your project and what can cause success or failure on a project, especially when it comes to UX. So we will talk about that a little bit later, but I wanted to dive in first and actually give you guys all an activity. And then we're going to break up into groups of 3, and it might be 3 or 4 depending on how these rooms form. And you'll work through this activity I'm going to give you, and then we'll come back and present it. When you come back to present it, we will take volunteers to present, and we'll just have one presenter per group present. Depending on how many groups we have will depend on how many people will get to present. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you guys came up with. And I'm super excited about this because I think that there's so many different ways to approach the activity that I'm going to give you. So I really want you guys to like use the time to discuss and think about it as if you are on this kind of like mini UX team in some ways to try to decide what it is that you want to do. The scenario is set up that you're a solo UX designer, but it's more like, let's figure out what we would do as a solo UX designer as a team. And there's lots of ways that you could approach this. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? If so, pop them in the comments. Otherwise, this is the activity. Ryan has already put this in a Google Dropbox or some sort of thing online, but you can also take a screenshot right now of it so you can have it when we break you out into groups. So I'll read through it. You've been hired as a UX designer. Congrats! Your boss is a product manager with a technical background, and this team has only worked with one individual visual designer in the past who is currently on the team. The rest of the team besides you and the other designer are a team of 4 developers and a project manager. You've been asked to design a mobile UI for a new app that will help people lose weight before they get an operation. An example of this is somebody who needs a knee surgery but can't go into surgery without losing weight because of the risks. What do you do in your first week on the job? So we'll break you guys up into groups, and then if we can, we'll do a little bit of bouncing around and kind of, we might hear a few groups as you're talking, but then we'll come back and we'll present. I'll let Ryan kind of take it from the technical side.
Yeah, tech guy, here I am. We did have one question.
Yes.
What was your background prior to your agency start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that coming into the design field is always a little bit tricky to do. And I want to acknowledge that for anybody that's trying to make that transition right now. I have 2 bachelor degrees. One is in public relations, which as I was getting that, I realized I didn't want to do. So I did a dual degree. And the other one is electronic media and communications with an emphasis in visual communications, which is just a mouthful to say. But I started with that degree in photography Then I went into social media for a very short amount of time. And then at that company that I was doing social media for, they were hiring a design intern. And I was like, and I saw it on a job posting. They didn't tell me. So I said, hey guys, you know that I'm trying to get into design. And they were like, okay, well, do you have a portfolio? And I said, yeah, I do. I'll give it to you tomorrow. And I didn't. I went home, printed out a bunch of design work that I had done for friends, family, random projects. I put it in a manila envelope and I showed it to them the next day. And they hired me for that intern position. And then I used that to basically leverage a position with them, but use that position that they were offering me to actually get the job at the agency. So you got to figure your way out, jump some hoops and stuff. And it's definitely a difficult thing to do, but it is possible. You just got to be a little bit creative about it. But if you are well suited for the design field, you will be able to make that jump relatively quickly because you're a problem solver.
I love that story. I know we've got a lot of hustlers in the group that are doing very similar stuff to what you described. So it's awesome to hear how that's turned out.
I've done some really weird things. Like I've sent people cupcakes that say like, I'm changing the experience of your Monday. Like there's been all sorts of odd things that I've done.
I love it. Cool. So I've got the breakout rooms created. We're gonna dump you in there. So you'll be in a group with 3 to 4 people total.
Cool.
How much time should we give them, Taryn, to talk through this?
Let me just pile back on our, like, what did we say we were doing? So was that 20 minutes?
Yeah. Cool. We'll give a little announcement when we're going to close the breakout rooms and pull everybody back in, and then we'll probably pop in and out just to say hi and see how things are going too. Here we go.
Good luck. Awesome. So we are going to have some people share. So if you have a group that's ready to share, you can put your name or your group in the comments and say we want to share, and then we'll kind of go down that list and see how many we get through, and then we will talk a little bit about each of those as we go.
Oh, perfect.
So brave souls will be the first. Okay, cool. And in terms of sharing, you can share whatever you want. I know that you were just together 20 minutes, so there's probably not anything to share on your screen. I did see as I was hopping around between groups that some people had some digital notes, some people had done some very basic sketches, and some people were just talking verbally. I don't expect anybody to share anything visually, but if that is something that you guys have done and you want to share, you're more than welcome to either share your screen or hold up something to your camera. So we'll start with Patrick, or Patrick's team, but he will represent his team since he commented.
Represent, yeah. Oh, my cat will present. Okay. Well, luckily, so we had Jonathan, Josh, and Renee on our team, and Jonathan is actually in this position right now as being onboarded at his company. So big hand for Jonathan. In general, we thought that this week is spent in a general outline of the empathizing stage of the design thinking process. And we were thinking about categories like team building, setting up a research plan, building like a set of guiding questions, and then there's a tactical list of tools and things like that. Specifically, we're thinking, we started to build out day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 a bit ambitiously, but we need to figure out what resources we have and where all the stakeholders are. Are we remote? Are we in person? What's available? Who's available to us and how? So communication lines. And then working on defining what we think the problem is or the job to be done is, probably both of those. And discovering what resources we have available as far as like maybe doing some team building events or I don't know, lunch and learns and stuff like that to find out about developers and what managers we're going to integrate with and where, find out about how people do stuff at the company. And then we really want to plan out how to talk to those internal stakeholders. So we think day 1 is going to be consumed with the planning stage. And so we think setting up like a digital lab, typically like a Miro, and having an infant canvas and splashing a whole bunch of ideas down on, for team building, who's paying the bills, who gets the decision process made, who's are really key players in the decision process, and reach out to those key players. What are their experiences already? Is there any tribal knowledge about this kind of app that they've built already? And then setting up a typical kind of research plan. Given that this is medical and about losing weight, something tells me that Pew Research Center probably has a ton of research on this, so there's probably some available. Can we talk to pre-op and post-op patients? What are fast weight loss dangers? What's healthy weight loss? Competitor analysis, marketing positioning, methodologies of how we're going to do our testing. And then building guiding questions where we really get to brainstorm about what's the business goal versus the goal of the client, who's going to use this for how long, and then, like I said, the tactical stuff. So that's really where our brain was going.
Cool. Do you think you can do all of this in a week?
As a plan, outlining it, yes.
Okay.
I do think that. I'm not talking about doing all this in a week. I'm talking
Sure.
about what's the, this might be this might be even a 4-month empathize stage. But as far as being able to plan it out, I think a reasonable amount of predictors of just what we know as UX, what are we going to need to know, and allow discovery to kind of drive the process. So yeah, I think, and please, any of my new colleagues can jump in and cut me off, please.
Sure, I'll give you guys 2 minutes just so we can also just time things a little. But go ahead.
I was a little long.
Oh no, you were fine. I just want to make sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. I think I'm certainly finished.
Cool. So I think like something I want to highlight that, and I also saw you guys working together as I was kind of going through groups, and I think this is awesome that you have everything that you need in front of you. Something I want to highlight that your group has written out here is who pays the bills. That is a really important question, and thinking about budget. So I'm just going to highlight that because it's something that you should always be thinking about, since you'll have to do maybe more persuasion around getting budget and stuff. If you're a junior designer, you're not going to have to do that as much, but as you get further up in your career, you will. So it's just good to think about it. I also like that you guys were breaking it out day by day so that you could actually get to a reasonable work week. In the first day on the job, it's obviously a lot of like onboarding. So what you have there might be better for day 2. And then the other thing is, and we'll see as we get to other people's as well, something I noticed as I was jumping around the room is there's a lot that everybody is trying to accomplish in the first week. So my advice to everyone is to think about sustainability and think about the pace in which you work on your first week. And if you can keep that pace for the next 2-3 years, that's where you kind of want to be. Obviously you want to hit the ground running and you want to, blow everybody out of the park, but sometimes there's a lot of strength when it comes to slowing down, and you can actually shift an organization by slowing down. So this is awesome. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you.
Cool. Who wants to go next?
I can jump in.
I guess, is that Mitchell?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Go ahead.
So my team and I just had a brief overview of what we tried to accomplish for the week. Organized team roles was our first thing, and then jump into research. The 4 different parts of research that I had put down on Google Doc I started was exploratory research, and sub-point of that is identify categories of health risks that would be most compromised by being overweight leading up to a surgery. So I'm sure there's studies on that that would help us identify where we need to collect our research. And then competitive analysis, are there current weight loss type apps to help someone get ready for a surgery? And if so, then go out and find out what they're currently doing and what seems to be clunky or missing from their design, so that we can decide whether or not we want to incorporate those in our designs. Then stakeholder survey. So as the last presenter had said, we need to know just who this app needs to meet the needs of. And so as he had pointed out, doctors, patients, and potentially hospitals that might be organizing and marketing this for us. And then a SWOT analysis, just identifying based on our exploratory research and competitive analysis, where we have opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then we also spent some of our 20 minutes talking about, what we're trying to accomplish in the overall of building an app like this. And so that would be incorporated into week 1, is just long-term goals and milestones along the way.
Cool. Awesome. Sounds like some really good stuff there. And I appreciate the fact that you're also trying to figure out some of the foundational stuff around stakeholders before you totally dive in. Cool. Who's next? It is Tessa.
Hi. So our group, we were talking about the first week would be a lot of, we thought, define and research. So one of the things we had to find out, more of the what's required for surgery. Like, is it just the pure weight loss numbers that need to be accounted for versus like, is it something to do with body fat? Like, kind of what are the more detailed parameters of it? Because that could affect just how data is, or what and how the data is gathered later on. So also with that, we would be doing research. So we were thinking like sending out a survey, whether that's to doctors, patients, even a general overweight population, to find out some of the struggles that either they see or they go through to try to lose weight, to be able to just wrap our heads around like the tone we should take, like what's really positive, a way to communicate things within the app. And so with that, we're not sure if maybe we would want to talk to people more in depth. So maybe include something on the survey about maybe contacting people for interviews somehow, if necessary, and also doing competitive analysis on other apps and things that are out there already. So we were more thinking, we actually, how much could we actually accomplish in the first week? So we kept it to define and research.
I'm muted. If you guys also have comments about what other people are saying, you can put it in the chat and give people ideas and feedback and respond to what they're saying too. Thank you so much, Tessa. Let's see. Nathan, you're next, or your group is next.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Our group talked about, I think, given that it's our first week, a lot of it is just sense making and trying to understand both the problem, but not just the problem, like what our team has done or is currently doing about the problem, where they at in the process, what they've tried in the past, what's working, what's not, and talking to them to understand like the business needs, what are the, like another participant said, like talking about the budget, talking to the developers, what are the tech requirements behind it, talking to them about what kind of integrations we need, like is this like a standalone app? Does this have to do with a insurance provider, medical provider, doctors? Kind of what is the overall kind of like ecosystem that this app exists in? And we also mentioned talking to the visual designer about like what making it integrate with other apps or services, so it's kind of a seamless experience. And then after like getting all that, which is probably enough for a week, we would want to focus on doing some exploratory research, looking at who our users are, what kind of conditions would require this, understanding their motivations for the surgery and stuff like that. And then also what makes them different from a traditional just weight loss app? Why couldn't they just use that? I assume there's a variety of differences having to do with medical or diet. Like they can't move certain ways, so certain traditional exercises might not be possible. And then along with that, doing some sort of competitive analysis where we look at what are the other weight loss tools using, if there is a specific one for surgeries, like what are they doing? How could we do it better? What's working with that? So yeah, that's kind of what we said. It's mainly trying to understand the problem and the situation and the users.
Cool. Awesome. Just so we can get a few more before we kind of take it over the next section. Lacey, T, and Trevor, I think you're next. That's where we are, right? If you're talking, I can't see you because you're muted, so it's not.
Sorry
There we
about
go.
So we covered a lot of what everyone else did. One of our first steps was to establish the research. Of course, luckily we were already given kind of a problem statement. So one of the first things that we wanted to do was basically talk with the developers to sort of build a relationship and establish any research that they've already established, or, you know, kind of access any research they've already established, and to find out if they had any particular questions that needed to be answered. And then we basically wanted to make sure that we weren't sort of like wasting any time on this. And we just found that it was, you know, always beneficial to sort of work with rather than work against developers. Then we wanted to move on to basically working out who exactly our stakeholders were so that we could really understand the scope, the scale, and the stakes of the project. Because like you said, you know, making sure that you actually, you know, have the most at your disposal when you're trying to essentially argue for money, even though we probably wouldn't be doing that, is kind of a big thing. Then we wanted to work on developing goals and kind of working around the backbone of establishing a first draft proposal for research. And one of the first steps on that was, like everyone else has said, competitor analysis. So there was no real need to reinvent the wheel when it's, you know, you can just improve on it. So part of that was to look for an unfilled niche, something that's hasn't really been done, something that we can do better than anyone else. And as part of that, we wanted to essentially we also wanted to look at all the negative reviews with apps that would be similar to what we were creating. Because even in the most negative reviews, there's still helpful research in there. There's still, you know, important takeaways that we can look into. We just, you know, it's basic pain point stuff. And then we wanted to start developing user maps and sort of working on the empathy of understanding who exactly our customers were, since by this point we would kind of understand who our stakeholders were, and we'd understand, you know, really what they're looking for, what their clear goals and desires that they're looking for this app are. And from that, you know, depending on the time that we still had, you know, start working on creating user flows and experience maps from the existing competitor analysis, kind of look at it and go, oh, okay, well, you know, it took them 6 to 8 steps to accomplish this. Is there any reason why we can't do it in, you know, 4 or 5? And just working on iterating beyond what they had created. And, you know, from there, just work on general user personas and that sort of thing. And just try to really flesh out as much research as we can kind of get.
Cool. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll kind of move on from there. I do see people are commenting, so you can also read along as people are commenting back. The next person group is Sean, Dominique, and Leo.
All right. Hi, everyone. We hit on a lot of the same points that everyone else has already shared. So some of the things that we did or talked about that were a little bit different. The first was establishing what the stakeholder and company's business needs are and what their vision is for the app that we're going to be developing and designing. And so, you know, finding out if they already have artifacts, if they've already done research, if they have a web-based app already that is being converted to mobile. So essentially not starting from zero and working on building on the foundation that they already have. One of the things that Dominique had brought up, she mentioned it in the chat as well, was, you know, if we have someone who has a knee injury, how are they going to do cardio? And so working specifically with physical therapists and dietitians and nutritionists to help out with figuring out some of the details on what would be included on the app for people that have an injury rather than just a weight loss app. And so moving from there, you know, some of the competitive analysis that people have mentioned, doing interviews and surveys with those professionals if possible to get the right data for what we're needing.
Cool. Okay, cool. Congratulations to all of you. You didn't fall for a very big hole that was in this, which is none of you decided to start actually getting into UI. So congratulations, you're not UI designers, you're UX designers. Give yourself a pat on the back. So now I'm going to go a little bit further into some stuff that I would do, and then we can discuss a little bit further. So let me share my screen again. Let me make sure I'm on the right one. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we did the groups of 3. We came back. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this in depth. I'm sure most of you have seen something like this. Oh my gosh, what is it called? A UX, Ryan, help me. What is the Iceberg? Sorry, okay. I totally spaced on the word iceberg. Yes, so the UX iceberg, this is something that's been drawn again and again in a few different, by a few different artists. And people talk about it all the time. I'm not sure where it actually came from, since in this particular context, the user is the boat and an iceberg is bad for the user. So that's a little bit of a flaw in the UX iceberg in itself. But the whole purpose of this, which you have all, you know, obviously seen, is that user interface is just the surface and there's so much more that comes before that. But my question is, what comes even before all of that? So let me just go back to the iceberg. You obviously have interaction design that's below UI, then you have like usability, then you have information architecture, then you have experience mapping. I think that there's a foundational thing that comes before of all of this, before the iceberg. So I'm going to ask you guys, what do you need before all of this? Or a different way to ask it, and I'm going to have you interact with this Mentimeter presentation. It's going to make a word map as you guys punch in, is what is the foundation of good UX? So if you go to menti.com and use this code, you can also do it directly from your phone as well, and put in words that are basically the foundation of good UX. So thinking about, what is there beyond this iceberg? We all know that there's, you know, the user experience journey is a foundational part of UX, but what do you need even before you have that? Empathy. Yeah, and this will start like as people also see ones that are different, it'll get bigger and smaller. Awesome. Yeah, so these are kind of similar. Research, the problem, define the problem, empathy, human-centered, limitation, value, the scope, Listening to the unsaid. I like whoever said that, listening to the unsaid. Understanding the clients. I like that somebody also put a KPI. You know, if you don't know where the goal is and where everybody's headed, how are you going to get there? Somebody got it. Okay, somebody's got it. The answer that I was personally looking for, and I'll bring it back over here, and you guys can keep doing that, and we'll come see what the chart looks like later, is buy-in. You need buy-in before you can get empathy, like before you can get into empathy, before you can get into any of these things, which are all very, very, very important. You need buy-in. And so basically the only way that you can be successful in UX is if you're in a situation in which UX is set up to be successful. So I don't know if any of you have ever had jobs where you've been brought in as a UX designer and given a problem, and then as you've tried to approach that problem, people have started to ask you very quickly for mock-ups or for some sort of artifact. They're looking for an artifact, and they didn't understand the UX process to begin with. So thanks, Ryan. So they're looking for this thing, and you have to try to figure out, okay, before people look for that thing, because they're probably most likely going to, how do I get buy-ins that I make sure that we're on, we're having good communication amongst the whole company about what UX is. So you're going to need a few things. You're going to need to set expectations. And that can be done all the way back to when you're actually job searching, is setting expectations and making sure that you're letting the company know what UX is up front. You also want to think about what the UX maturity is of the company when you're interviewing with them, or if you've already interviewed with them and you're taking a role with them and you're starting there on square one. You want to look at the company and understand what the maturity is in terms of UX at the company. The problem that we were talking about is they were at not a very high level of UX maturity within the company. They'd never worked with a UX designer before. They'd only worked with a visual designer. So a lot of them at the company probably hear the word designer and think visual designer, especially if it's a person in another department and you haven't been introduced that you're doing something different. So you want to make sure that you understand where they're at, because if you start talking to them about all of these things, like, like we need to define the problem, what's our hypothesis, we need to do research, all of that stuff is so important, but you have to, in that particular case, bring it down to their level of where their UX maturity is for them to be able to hear you. So the most important thing you can do after you've found the UX maturity is actually build trust with people in your company. If you find you're at a company that has a really low level of UX maturity, your job in the first week is not going to be to come in and start doing research. Your job is going to be to build relationships with other people throughout the company. So one of the groups actually was talking about this a lot, where they were talking about collaborating with all these different people around the company. And I don't know if they were thinking about this like super strategically, or if it was just more intuitively of forming these relationships with different people. So you can build trust with people by asking them questions. A stakeholder interview is, yes, it's for gathering information, but really what it's for that'll help you in the long run is the building trust. You shouldn't skip the stakeholder interview at the very beginning because somebody's told you like, well, you have all the information, like you'll be fine. We've already told you what it is that we're working on, like just start working on it. You're missing out on an opportunity in your first week to meet with all of these people that also have the patience that they're never going to have at another time when you're working for the company that they'll have when you're new. So if you're new, you get to be stupid and ask all these questions and leave. You don't have any biases at that point. Everybody in the company is going to have their biases and they're all going to be working towards different ways. But what you get to do is you get to come in without any biases and interview people individually. Yes, stakeholders, but also as one of the teams said, like, talk to the visual designer, and you're going to get all this information about where the problem is in the company. Because if you don't have a well-functioning team, it's not going to make a well-functioning product. You have to make sure that your foundation is actually working before your product works. And then from there, you can also educate people about true UX. Because of where UX is as a field right now, it's kind of in, I want to say it's in like the gangly teenager stage where it's like awkward and it has a bunch of pimples and it's like really confident even though it shouldn't be. Like that's where UX is, and people will, take a class on UX and be like, I know what UX is, and then talk about it all the time. And a lot of working in UX is listening to people about their knowledge about what UX is, and then helping guide them and helping infuse UX into the company. Because you're not going to be able to do all of the UX alone. You have to have everybody in the company involved in UX. So your job is to be the very first advocate for the user, but you shouldn't be the only advocate for the user. So you should slowly be planting seeds over time. And this isn't going to happen in the first week, but the strategy for this could, if you just have the intention of doing this, which is every time you're having a conversation with somebody, just asking them oh, and then what did you think about the user when you were doing that, and planting those seeds so that when a developer is up at midnight, banging away at some code, and he has a decision to make about, the design 6 months from now, he actually makes the right decision because you've planted that seed about thinking about the user. So you're there as a facilitator. You're not there as anything really more than this. You're basically making the soil, right? You're laying down some soil, you're telling everybody how to garden, and then everybody has to do it together in order to grow this wonderful, beautiful garden. If you decide, and this is an option, but I'm just going to kind of give you it 2 ways. If you decide, I'm going to do it all myself, I'm going to be that UX person, I'm going to hold all the responsibility for the user experience, you might grow something in the garden, but it's not going to be as big, and you will probably burn yourself out and either have to leave and try to find another job, and you'll be going from job to job to job being why is it that nobody gets UX? I need to find another job. Or you'll end up frustrated. There's all these ramifications that might happen if you don't allow others to also support user experience, because user experience is not a solo job. You're just being an advocate for everybody else to experience UX as well. Anyway, sorry, I got on rants. The other things though, there's what it is in the wild and what it is in theory, right? So in theory, you can say, okay, I understand this is what UX is. I need to plant this seed. I need to build trust with people. You are going to end up in the wild where somebody is going to ask you hey, I need those things. Why, what are you doing? I need to make sure that you're doing something. So this is why I put to show perceived value. Perceived value is important as opposed to value, because you could be doing something that is setting up the company for success in the long run, and it is very, very valuable. But if people around you don't perceive that it's valuable, then it's not putting you in a trusting relationship with the company, and therefore it's putting your job at risk, and it's maybe causing a little bit of I don't know how to, it's not causing trust with other people in the company where they're going to come to you and you guys are going to collaborate really well. So you need to make sure whatever you're doing, you're talking about what the value is and you're really communicating that well. And then also sometimes you might have to give people small wins. So if somebody's asking you for, let's say a UI, and they're we need to get this out right now. We know it's your first week. We just have to do this. In that particular case, you can ask them questions about it, ask them why it's in the scope, ask them about their prior research. They might have all of everything that they need to back it to actually put it in the product. And you might have to rotate and flip and support them in that small amount of time, but finding boundaries of doing it in a way that you're not enabling them. So you really have to think and pause, and every situation is going to be different, but think and pause. Okay, in this situation, what can I do to help so that I'm building trust? But what am I going to, what do I end up doing in this situation that is enabling them to not understand UX? And where is that boundary? And I'd have to go through some examples to really work that out with you, but it's just a question I want to put in your head. And then to show results. So showing some sort of results, even if it's, you know, what that very first group did, where they wrote out the fact that they were going to have, like, this is day 1, this is day 2, day 3. You don't have to have actual artifacts, but being able to like show what it is that you're doing can give people a lot of, it can ease their anxiety when they're not sure what UX actually does. Okay, I just went on a whole long rant. I haven't checked the comments, so I just want to check if anybody is saying anything on the comments. I can't get to them while I'm presenting, I don't feel like. Ryan, is there anything?
I can help you. I saw a couple questions.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Well, this one, you kind of just talked about this. So are UX deliverables a way to show perceived value?
Yes, but also there's a lot of other ways to do perceived value, right? So if you're in a meeting, let's say, and there's a bunch of people having a discussion, and you notice that they keep using 3 different words to describe the same thing, and you say, oh, hey, I have a question. Can we slow down? I've heard this word. It seems to be for the same thing, and you guys have used 3 different words. Is that the same thing? And then everybody goes like, oh, yeah, that is the same thing. You could say, oh, okay. Well, have you guys gone and put together a agreed upon taxonomy that, like, have you ever done that? And maybe, you know, the question, like the answer is like, no, we haven't, like, we're going to move forward. Even by making that small comment and having people be like, oh my gosh, we're wasting so much time, like getting confused about what we're talking about because we haven't come up with a common set of words, that's still adding value if they take it in a way that seems valuable. It's the way that you deliver it. But yes, UX artifacts are obviously also perceived value as well. My point is that you can add value in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't have to be an artifact. It can also be through like small little comments, tidbits, conversations you have, and asking people when you're interviewing them. One question I like to ask when I'm new on a job is like, what is the best UX designer you've ever worked with, if they've worked with a UX designer before, because you'll understand their values. And then also, how are you, like, what are you excited about? Like, why are you excited to have a UX designer? And is there anything that I can do to help you? Because then you'll start to understand what each person's value is. And if you understand what each person's value is, then you'll understand what you need to prioritize in your workload in order to create perceived value. Because if nobody cares about artifacts and that's what you've been taught is perceived value and people don't use them, then that's not the one that you should use. Long answer.
I love it. That was awesome. Thank you. There was another question up here. What do you find to be 1 or 2 of the best methods for finding your first client?
Knowing yourself. I know that's a weird answer, but I think knowing yourself is really, really important, because if you just find a client and they're not a good fit, it's not worth having them. I've had to fire clients in the past, and it's a very painful thing to do. From like a marketing perspective of finding your first clients, I think it's understanding the market that you want to target. So it's going through, I personally, when I started consulting, I hired marketing people, I hired copywriters for my website. I hired a bunch of different experts that had skills that I didn't have. And then I got really, really specific about who I wanted to target. I chose 2 targets. I wouldn't suggest that. I would suggest choosing 1 target. My targets were well-funded. They had to be well-funded startups that were working on products that help the world. That was 1 target. And another target was solo entrepreneurs that were in a place where they were up leveling. They had already been successful in their business, and they were up leveling their business, and they were doing a rebrand. I've had clients in both of those, and they've both been very different clients, but both equally really cool clients. It's just, if you have two target audiences, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you when you're doing a bunch of marketing and stuff. But getting really specific on who you're targeting, just like if you're doing user experience, you have to get really specific on who your users are. It's the same thing if you're consulting and you're trying to get clients, and then creating content that basically serves those clients. So when I was looking to target well-funded startups that, like basically I was targeting business owners, I created a YouTube channel where I talked about UX and explained it in really simple terms to business owners. And that got me clients that were interested in actual UX and not just visual design.
Very cool. I don't think I have any more questions, but Patrick Keating said, Jared Spool talks about focusing on UX outcomes, not UX deliverables. Do you have anything to add on that topic?
No, I love Jared Spool. UX outcomes, not UX deliverables. I mean, I think that that's why KPIs are really important, right? So if you go into a company and they don't have a goal, it's going to make it hard for you. Like, if they don't have a goal, you should try to ask for the goal, or try to be the person that gets them to a goal, even if it's not a very strict KPI, because then you can focus on the outcome instead of focusing on the artifact. And I completely agree with him, because you don't just want to be spewing out artifacts all the time. The other thing that's really important too, when it comes to portfolio pieces and what makes for a stronger portfolio, is having those metrics and having those outcomes, as well as a stronger resume. If you have percentages and numbers and other metrics in both your resume and your portfolio, then you're more hireable. So when you're on a project, especially if it's one of your first or second or whatever project, really whatever, but early in my career, I didn't know this. I wish that from the very beginning I did. I wish I knew that it would have made my portfolio stronger, because then I would have been able to go and try to get those projects that had metrics, so that I would have gotten better projects it would have excelled my career much more quickly. And once I figured out that was something that people looked for, it did excel my career much more quickly than previously when I wasn't talking about outcomes.
Great. Okay. I think that's it for now.
Cool. Okay. So weird. I'm so used to so I used to teach in person, immersive classes, and it's so weird that I can't see everybody's face at the same time. I'm like, how's everyone doing? What's going on? Okay. So this is something I put together. I did a few different variations of this. If you look me up on LinkedIn, I actually have an article of how I came to this particular diagram. I've gone through a few different types of diagrams, but what I wanted to point out about this diagram, and you guys all mentioned this, is the stakeholder interviews. You really can't do much unless you're actually talking to the people that are going to make the decisions. And if you are taking on a project where, and maybe you're doing it for a friend, or you're doing it, to just get a portfolio piece, if people that are making decisions don't want to collaborate with you and don't want to talk to you, you're not going to be able to do the project. And Lainey can describe her experience here that she's had recently too, if you want to, or not. It's really
experience.
Oh, I was just going to say, you've had this experience, right? Of trying to work with the stakeholders and they wouldn't work with you.
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to ask you what you would do in that scenario, because it was really difficult just being, as I was remote, and it was a very, it was very new to UX, very low maturity level on UX for the organization. I was the first person that had ever done real UX there. They had a graphic designer who was kind of learning about UX and thought she was doing UX basically, but that's about it. So it was really hard to kind of get that buy-in in the beginning, and it was hard to even get them to set meetings with me remotely. Everything was done on Slack. We couldn't really ever have meetings in person on Zoom or anything, and they would cancel all of those meetings. So it's just really tough. So like, what would you do in that kind of scenario where you can't get people to meet with you to get that buy-in and to have those conversations that are so important in the beginning?
Yeah, when I was consulting, I created this form that everybody had to fill in before working with me. It did a few things, but mainly what it did was filter people out. So most people that didn't want to invest the time in the project wouldn't fill out the form. The other thing it did is one of the questions on the form was asking them about their budget and figuring out which range they were in. And if they weren't in a certain range, they probably weren't going to be able to like invest the time anyway. So I think what I would do is figure out a way to set things up, like automate it to make sure you pick the right clients. When I first started consulting, I used to do free consultation sessions with people as a way to sell them on packages and customize packages. And I soon learned that that was like a lot of time on my part to be doing these free consultation calls. And I needed to figure out how to like readjust the process. So then that's when people would email me and they'd be like, hey, I have a project, I'm so excited. And I would send them this huge long form. I mean, it's like not a fun form to fill out, but it also in that form, it asks them specifically about their users. And it asks them, do you know what your ideal user is? I said ideal customer, I think, because that's just something that they would understand instead of users. They like usually people that aren't in user experience don't know the word users. So what is your ideal customer? Do you know what it is? Yes or no? And if they hit yes, then they would fill out a list of questions about their ideal customer. And if they hit no, they would fill out the same exact list of questions. I just reworded it of like, who do you think your ideal customer is? What do you think their age range, like, who do you think you're targeting? Because if I could get them through that form of actually answering all those questions, then they were probably a right fit for me. So for me, it was just mainly filtering people out from the get-go so that I didn't end up in a scenario like that. If I did end up in a scenario that you're speaking of, I think I would do exactly what you did. You basically ended up saying to them, hey, I can't work with you guys because you're not communicating with me. So you fired the client. And I think that's completely reasonable.
Yeah, I kind of had to. It was unfortunate because I was actually like getting paid, but but I wanted to ask, are you willing to share that resource with us, with the group?
Sure. I have a few different variations of it. So I can definitely try to figure out which one would be a good shareable. It's very specific to like, let me get that. Maybe let me go and look. I'll share some sort of version with you guys. It might not be like big.
Find something, just send it to me and I'll put it up on our discussion board for the Meetup group.
Okay.
If we get that out.
Sure.
Cool.
Okay. So this brings me back to kind of what I was saying, which is it all starts with the job search. You can't, you can't turn a giant ship by yourself. So you have to make sure that you get on the right ship. And the right ship is different for every single person. Some people might work really, really well in a large organization with lots of the resources that they have, and maybe they're not that UX savvy, but their personality is somebody that can be very, very patient and over time slowly kind of like tweak that ship. Maybe you have another person that like is more like scrappy and needs to like work at a startup. Every company, can be a good fit for somebody. It's just knowing yourself and knowing like what you personally can deal with in terms of the UX maturity of the organization. And the other thing is this changes over time. Like you might need something at the beginning of your career where you need a little bit more support in terms of UX maturity. You might want to go into some organization that doesn't have any UX at all, and you get to be that scrappy UXer that does all the bits, and you learn and fail, and that's just how you are as a person. But you need to constantly be thinking yourself as you go on every job search, like where am I in my career right now, and what is it that I need to grow to the next point of my career, and what does that mean about a company in terms of their UX maturity, so that you find the right fit for you. I don't think there's like a wrong fit of company anywhere. There are companies that they want the value of UX without investing in UX, and those are still interesting companies to some people, but they might be interesting companies to people that are much further along in their career, that have a lot of other extra skills when it comes to like organizational psychology, and they want that to be their problem that they're fixing, which is the organization instead of the user problem. So like, could be, you know, every company has like a possibility of being a really cool problem to solve. You just have to figure out like, what types of problems do I want to solve? Do I want to solve user problems, or do I want to solve company problems? And how much do I need to be supported where I am in my career? And then finding out budgets. I think that it's really good question to ask, like, what have you spent, you know, on research in the past 6 months? Is that going to change? Trying to figure out how they're actually recruiting participants, I think, is a really good question too. Because if you ask them if like how they've recruited participants in the past and they're like, we haven't, that's why we're hiring you. That's something that you need to know, because if you are somebody that really likes recruiting participants, cool, awesome. I have personally structured my entire career where I've never had to recruit participants. But that's because I hate recruiting participants. So like, you just have to figure out what it is that you want and then make sure that you find those things. Every single organization that I worked with when I was consulting, in my statement of work that I sent to them, I have a section that says, I do this, you do this, I do this, you do this. And I lay out the fact that they are responsible for recruiting participants and that they need a budget to recruit participants, to give participants like X amount of money per session. But that if they can't recruit participants, it's not on me. That's just because I just don't like recruiting participants. That's my own little thing. And then finding out their vision and what their values are. I think this is really important, of like knowing where they're going. If you know, are joining a company and you want to see the transition that they're making, that's obviously going to be a lot more exciting. Maybe they don't have a vision at all and they're looking for somebody to come in and be more of that like visionary UX person. That's a job role in itself, but it's one that you probably only want to get to when you're more in like lead and beyond part of the UX career. It's a bit too much when you're entering the industry. And then what their values are, I think that's really important. But yeah, all of this starts with like choosing the right company. And then once you've chosen the right company, having the patience to build the relationships and the trust, and know that it's just going to take time. You don't get this is totally the opposite of school, right? School, you're like, okay, I'm going to do my project. I'm going to find out like the user problems. Then we're going to do a bit of research. Then we're going to start doing, you know, sketches, wireframing. You go through the whole UX process, but people don't talk about like outside of that. When you get into jobs, you often have this like struggle because UX as an industry isn't supported at like the CXO level, right? There's like a CMO, there's, you know, a CEO, there's a CTO. User experience, just like where it is as an industry, is not there yet. So you just have to do a lot more due diligence on your part as you're looking for your job to make sure that there is either leadership of UX of some sort in the company, or that the company really is willing to invest in UX and you'll be successful in your role. Okay, I think my rant's over. What other questions do we have? And how am I doing with time? I realized like halfway through that my time is different than the time that I had on the agenda, and then I got a little confused.
We're at 7:30 Colorado time right now, so it's 6:30 your time. And we do have, I thought we had a question. Let's see. So what time did we say this was over? 8, or did we say 7:30?
That's where I got confused, because I was like, oh, we said 7:30. Okay. Wow.
How much more do we have to go?
No, that was the Q&A, and then it's
okay.
Yeah.
So we can just ask maybe a couple more questions then?
Yeah, I'm totally willing to stick around for questions as people have them, because it's always my favorite part.
Cool. Okay, hold on. Let me.
I love interacting with like my students, my users, you know, not having a one-way conversation.
What do you think of a company that invests in user interviews but does not invest in online platforms like usertesting.com? therefore does not do unmoderated and other online testing.
That's interesting. I actually haven't. Okay. So when it comes to research generally with companies, what I've noticed is they're a lot more willing to invest in usability testing and usability studies than they are to invest in generative. So like they're more likely to invest in evaluative research than they are to invest in generative research. So this question is interesting because it's kind of the opposite, since user interviews are more generative research, and they're saying that they're not using, did they say not using things like user testing?
Yeah, I think like usertesting.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of just have to know as like the researcher, okay, there's a few things that my head's going in a few ways. One, do they trust you, and do you have the experience to be able to make the decisions on how you're going to, like, on what research methods you should use? Is the reason that they're not using user testing a budget reason? Because that's very different than like a fundamental like philosophy reason. And if the reason is a budget reason and they just don't want to use user testing, but they are interested in user testing as a method, then that's a very different scenario, because you could do moderated tests and still go about having that method be done. As somebody that I definitely personally like qualitative forms of research better, so moderated testing for me is my favorite. Like unmoderated testing is fine, but I always like being able to moderate it because things happen in the middle of people using the products that like I always want to ask about. So in that particular scenario for me, I'd ask more questions about like why it is that they're not using user testing. And if they were okay with doing moderated testing, I feel like I could still do my job well, and our values align in terms of using a lot of qualitative data to be able to still do what it is that I'm good at. So that's it's going to depend on the person, the methods that they are good at using and like to use, and then why the company is not using user testing.
Have you ever worked for a company? This is my question. Have you ever worked for a company that wouldn't let you do user testing or didn't want you to do it for some reason?
Yeah, so I've worked for companies that didn't want me to do user testing because of budget, because it is quite expensive. And then I went and found other tools and pitched it to them and then got budget for smaller things. Or I've also found other types of methods that I could use to basically do research that was somewhat going to give me the same amount of information that I needed anyway. So I have had to work around that constraint before. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Another question, this was a little bit earlier, is avoiding design debt one of the invisible values you use when talking about UX perceived value?
Yeah, avoiding design debt. It's a difficult one to talk about because it depends on who your audience is. Yes, avoiding design debt is definitely valuable. When you're talking to a business person and you talk about design debt, you have to convert it to money, like convert it to numbers. If you can take design debt and you can equate it to something, and Envision actually has a really good article on this recently of how you can convert like design, like things into numbers, then that would be a really good way of showing value of that situation. If you were doing it for engineers, instead of talking about design debt, you'd want to talk to them about how it's going to affect their coding later, right? So you'd be like, okay, if this design debt happens and then we have to redesign it because of the design debt, that means you're going to have to re-architect it, versus if we had just done it right from the very beginning and we had worked together, like me and you, the back-end developer, on what the architecture was, then we could have come up with the right structure from the beginning and then built on it iteratively over time. that's when you'll get like engineering to support you. So it depends on your audience and how you want to talk to them about the design debt. But just talking about design debt generally to different audiences is not going to win them over. If you're like, but there's going to be design debt, you know, to like a business person, they're going to be like, we don't care. Like, okay, so there is.
That makes sense. Are there any other examples of perceived value that you can give us?
Yeah, let me think about perceived value. I would really go with this one to try to figure out what they think is valuable and then try to think about what you can do that is going to ignite that value that they have. Because I can't, here's a good metaphor. If I asked you like, what is the absolute perfect gift for somebody? It's like, well, who's the person, you know? Like, I don't know. But if you say like, what's the perfect gift for Susie, who's a 3-year-old baby that loves the color pink, and like I give you all these details, then you'll be able to find a gift. So perceived value, with the word perceived there, it makes it so that it has to be customized to the person in which you're presenting it to.
Cool. I love all your like real world examples you use, like the gift. And I think you told me one about you're on a boat and you have so many strokes you get to get to shore or something. You always have like some little
I guess that's the way my brain works, maybe, or like how I learn.
Well, it helps you visualize it. I like that.
Yeah, I have a whole entire one about an orchard for information architecture. So
you should write like a little book of like Tarrynisms or something.
That's so funny. I wouldn't like, it's funny because I just do them and like I need somebody to follow me around to document them.
That's really great. I love that. Okay, another question here. When you say that UX isn't as developed as that long list of current existing solidified positions and that you have to sort of offer more work on more things as a UX designer to find a position, what would some of those things to supplement yourself be?
I'm closing up the screenshot. I think I need to like read this one through.
Joshua at 732.
Yeah.
Trying to find it in the.
I see it as the long list of current existing solid pages.
Or if Joshua is still on the call and wants to.
Oh yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, yeah, I think I might have worded it a little funky, but I remember you gave a long list of like, you know, current, like the PTOs, the CFOs, that's such and such. And you mentioned something on the lines of that since UX is still in that teenage phase that maybe sometimes the hiring companies or recruiters don't really understand what you do, but you said something on the lines of like that, oh, you know, like, so you just got to sort of work at it a little bit to get that position you may or may not want. And I was just wondering like how did you personally work with around that?
Yeah, so I think there's this tendency, especially when you're new to the field, to want to be everything to everyone, right? So you hear from the market that they want you to have all the skills and you need to do research, but you also need to do interaction design, and you need to do information architecture, but you also need to do visual design, and you need to do, you know, like so on and so forth, and you need to do all these things. And if you wait until you feel confident in all of those things to pursue a career in UX, you're never gonna pursue a career in UX. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen, because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And you know, that's just what happens as you kind of expand your knowledge. You're like, wow, this is a lot bigger of a topic than I thought it was. So what's better is to think about what you're naturally good at and where you want to focus and where you want to grow your skills. And you will naturally be able to find what part of UX you're good at by looking at what you do on a day-to-day basis. So if you're somebody that like likes to organize your closet and likes everything like super kind of organized and structured, information architecture is probably something that comes to you naturally. Thank you.
Microphones.
If you're somebody that sits and does a lot of like kind of interior designing and stuff, maybe visual design is more of your thing. If you're somebody that, I love your dog. I'm like, what is the other part? Oh, if you're somebody that's like always asking people questions, like maybe you're constantly asking people like questions about themselves and you're asking why and you're digging into like the deep needs of your friendships and stuff, maybe you're better at like the qualitative research side of things. Like there's like looking at who you are as a person and then developing those skills more deeply and thinking about yourself. And I'm sure you guys have heard this too. It's like, don't be a unicorn, be a tea designer. So you have like a little bit of everything, but you have like a very deep part in a few of those things and you choose those things. And maybe you're like, oh, I'm a combination. And for me, this is how I personally am. I'm a combination of like the qualitative research and information architecture and interaction design. Those are like where I'm deeper. I'm not that great at the visuals compared to some of the visual designers out there. And I talk about that and I own that and I talk about it in interviews, and that actually helps hiring managers differentiate me, because if I say, oh, I'm good at everything, I can do everything, they know that it's a lie. But if I say I'm not good at this thing and I give them the thing, then they can look at their team and look at what they're filling and then decide if I'm like the puzzle that fits into that piece or not. The other thing too, this is like a research study that they did on, I forget where it's from, but I'll tell you guys this and maybe it's helpful. There was this study that they did where this person, it was an actor, her job was to make smoothies in a grocery store and sell this smoothie machine. So she'd make the smoothies and pass them out and yada, yada. She did that for a day. And then on the next day, she did the same exact thing, but the only difference that was made was she spilled the smoothie, and she sold way more smoothies on the second day than she did on the first day. And turns out that the reason that was is because people are looking for a human flaw. So when she did everything perfectly, people were like, oh, like there's something wrong here. Like, I don't see the thing that's wrong. I can't find the thing that's wrong. So like, I'm not going to buy the smoothie machine because it must, like maybe there's something wrong with the smoothie machine. They're like looking for something that's wrong. So if you're in the middle of an interview and you do something wrong, know that that's you dropping the smoothie and it's actually making you more likable as a candidate. And like, it should be a point of relief. The other thing is like, give them something to not like so that they can focus on that and then move on past that and enjoy the rest of you as a person. Yeah, sorry. I feel like I had to tell the smoothie thing for some reason.
Another story. I love it. So many. Are there any other job interview red flags that aren't so obvious?
There's so many red flags. I feel like it goes back to who you are and what you value, right? And I'll say that again and again because that's really important. For me, if people are not kind, that is a huge red flag because you're not going to be able to collaborate with them and communicate with them and be able to actually get your work done. This is what's popping up into my head. I recently thought that I got like ghosted for a job interview, which has never happened to me. And if you look on my LinkedIn, I have like a little bit of a rant about it. But if something like that happens to you, which turns out it actually didn't, I was just flustered. That's a good thing to realize that that company is not a good fit. And it's okay if you don't get the job. I think when you're job searching, what's really important is to realize that like jobs that don't pick you, you might have not picked them anyway. So it's okay that they didn't pick you. I see job searching very much the same way as dating. And a few years ago, I decided to be a matchmaker for 6 months on the side because I love psychology and humans. And I was like, this is a cool, fun thing to do in my spare time. And the thing that happens with matchmaking is I was coaching these people on dating and sending them on blind dates and helping them find a significant other. And they were in such a state of desperation that they forgot to think about like their needs. And so this kind of did two things. One, it either caused them to choose the wrong partners, or two, it caused them to come off as, so desperate that it turned the other party off. And I think people can read that energy. If you are okay, and this goes into like, once you actually get the job interview and you're negotiating, you have to have respect for yourself to be able to know that you're worthy of a job and you're a worthy human being, and you can walk away from situations that are bad in order to not choose the wrong situation, and also to send the right type of energy so that company actually respects you more because you stand by your morals and you're not willing to, bend over backwards to do anything for them. You're starting that relationship way before you ever start the job. And whatever you do during your job interviews, you're going to have to, there's consequences of whatever you do during your job interviews for the rest of the time that you have the relationship with that company. So if you're in a job interview and they're asking you like, oh, well, would you do this? Would you, do 100 different prototypes, but we don't really have time for research. And then we're just going to send it out to our developers in China who you're not going to be able to talk to. If you like even slightly go like, well, that's a possibility, you have now put yourself in a different situation than if you stood your ground and said, no, I will not do that. The reason is that it's not going to be good for your business because you're actually going to have to redo those designs because there's going to be miscommunication with the developers because I'm not going to be able to talk to them about all the details of why the designs are how they're designed. There's also going to be something that's built that's not actually serving users because we didn't do any research, and I'm not willing to do that. Like standing up for UX and standing up for the user and standing up for who you are is really, really important, like from the get-go. And doing that is more likely to actually get you a job. I've gone into job interviews, or actually how I got a lot of clients. I got my first client accidentally before I ever started consulting because I met this guy in a coffee shop and he was introduced to me from like a friend. And I sat down next to him and he was working on his computer and I made a few comments and then he was like, oh, can you tell me some more? And I ripped his website apart. I was like, that's an issue. That's totally wrong over there. Like, this is another like UX heuristic that you're breaking. I spent 2 hours just ripping this guy's like website apart because I was in like a mood. And he was like, can I hire you? Like, that's how I got my first UX client. So.
Nice. Let's see. Do you think that you have to be likable to be a very successful researcher?
It depends on the type of research, I think. If you're a quantitative researcher that's sending out surveys that, nobody ever has to see your face, then no, you don't have to be likable at all. Like that's, you should be likable to your coworkers so that you can, like collaborate with them. It also depends on the user. Right. So certain types of atmospheres require different types of ways to approach them. I think it's really important to be sensitive to, like, let's say that you're working on a project for abuse victims and you're doing interviews in person and people are coming into an environment that they've never been to and they're not feeling safe. In that particular context, I would take great care to welcome them at the door, to offer them coffee or tea, to do things very, very slowly and gently because that user needs that. If you're working with somebody that, one of my last projects, the users were developers and they didn't need that. They didn't need somebody that was mean, but they needed somebody that was like relatively logical and could talk in their same type of communication style. So I think yes and no, like it depends on the user and it also depends on the type of research you're doing.
Good answer. How do you feel about overselling yourself just a bit because it seems like a lot of companies want you to know everything and do everything?
I think like my approach is to like I would rather go look at a bunch of companies, find companies that I really, really connect with, and then target them heavily in very unique and different ways than be in a situation where I felt like I had to continuously sell myself. Like, yes, you have to be marketable, right? So there's a certain, and I would actually love like Ryan and Chelsea's like opinion on this one too, because it's a bit of, I don't want to give an answer and then have, I think it's better to get a variety of answers for this particular question. So for me personally, like I'm not a salesperson. That was the number one weakness of my consulting company. It was, why I stopped consulting was because selling was a very draining activity for me. So I'm an educator. And so what I try to do through my social media and through my website and through a bunch of other things is I try to educate people about UX. And that's what usually gets people to contact me for job opportunities. And then I don't have to do as much selling. So that's how I personally like approach it. But I think that there's lots of different ways to approach it.
Yeah, I'll jump in since I was called on. I think that I feel like we all run into this, especially in interviews. You just feel like you're selling yourself, which is true, you are. But the company should be selling themselves to you too. And I feel like you got to keep saying that to yourself over and over and over again, because it's really easy to feel like it's not going both ways. But as far as overselling yourself, my thought is maybe do that, because if you're worried about that, you probably are worth a lot more than you're giving yourself credit for. But oversell yourself on what you're great at, as opposed to overselling yourself on things you've never heard of. So if you know a little bit HTML and CSS, but like you really shouldn't be writing code, don't say you're a great coder. But if you're like a good ethnographer, like say you're a great ethnographer and say you're going to be the absolute best at what you want to do and what you want to be. And then all you have to do is just build on your core skills. And all that does then is just set up higher expectations for what you're already good at, as opposed to coming up on the job week one and having to learn something that you probably can't learn in week one anyway.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So when I was freelancing, I think it was very easy to be like, yeah, I can do any of these things. Like I'll figure it out, whatever it takes to like get your business. Just like the reality of having to pay bills. But looking for a place where I'm going to spend time and call home for a little while and work on a product, or during my agency time, I think it's really important. People are going to see your portfolio and your resume already. So I think definitely don't oversell yourself in those places. Be really honest and forthcoming about your experience and show your real. That doesn't mean in a portfolio, like you can't say this is the overall project and include things that you worked on as a team. It doesn't have to be like, well, I only worked on this part of that. I think including other people's work is part of the overall story in your portfolio. But I do think those two places, it's great to be really honest. So you're not coming in setting false expectations. And then I agree with Ryan, like once you're already in there and you're sitting at a table, if you can like find that salesmanship inside of yourself and like really put yourself out there, you know what you're capable of and you're already at the table. So they're already considering you. And I think, there's a way to fluff it up without making it false. And that's the direction I would go with. Perfect.
That. This is why I wanted your guys' input, because that's like, I thought that those were great answers.
Great answers. And I agree with both of those. I don't have a ton of experience with interviewing in UX, but I do have 10 years of experience in another field where I interviewed a lot. And I was a manager, so I interviewed people as well. And I think the number one thing that some advice someone gave to me one time that I've always taken to heart was just to really be yourself and to really show yourself in your interviews, because it comes naturally, and then you naturally talk about what you're great at, and you're not lying, you're being yourself. So that's always the most important thing that I've always taken with me to interviews, and it shows for sure.
Yeah, no, it does. I think that that's kind of how I am. Is like, I'm really, really passionate about some things. And like, if you ask me questions, right? Like you guys are asking me questions now, I'll like sit and talk about them for forever because I love UX. Like it's an amazing, like, what other career do you get to go into where you go into all these different places and learn about different industries and get to, you know, be a new learner again and again and again. Like, that is so cool to me.
Definitely. We have a few more questions. Do you want to keep answering, or?
I'll keep answering as long as people aren't getting tired of me answering. I know that when I used to teach, like when you're having one person talk for a while, it can be a little bit monotonous for people. So I want to get everybody to like, maybe like do a little like shake, like make sure you haven't been in your chair too long. Yeah, Ryan has a shimmy going.
This reminds me of corporate wellness. So my previous career was corporate wellness, and we would get people to get up in a meeting and like, you know, do some jumping jacks or do some squats and like.
No, that's perfect. I think we should all be super, super aware of it because it's, you know, with the world that we're living in now and everything being remote. I know that I went to the chiropractor yesterday and she was like, okay, you definitely sit at a desk. And I'm like, I know.
That's what my chiropractor said today, actually.
Buying a ridiculous chair is my next investment. Like, I have $1,200 chairs.
My partner just bought one and it has like it has like a head like rest thing, and I'm like, wow, that's like super fancy. But then Lainey has one. I sat in it and I was like, this is actually super amazing because then my head knows where to be instead of doing this.
It's like $100 cute thing from Home Goods is not the ticket.
No, I had
spot in here, like, what's the orchard story related to information architecture? I actually, I think instead of me telling it would, like, I have a video on it on my YouTube channel, so I can actually link it instead, just to save us a little time. Let me.
Okay, you can do that. There's a couple of questions up here. Christina asks, do you ever put a packet together to offer a company pain points or info, visuals?
Sorry. Go ahead.
That without sounding desperate.
Do I ever put a packet together to talk about, sorry, I was looking at that video. I see it.
Like pain points or information, visuals?
Yeah. So when I've done consulting before, yeah, you said, I know that you say you aren't visual focused. Let me be super specific. I'm not visually focused, but if you go and look at my website, it's not but ugly, right? Like, I still understand that people relate to like visual things. I tried. So if you go to my old portfolio site, it's tarrynlambert.com, and then you compare it to tarrynlambertconsulting.com, you can see I really tried to do the but ugly portfolio site. Like, I was like, I'm going to make this portfolio site, like the main homepage is not going to look good. And that's going to help me weed out all these people that want me to do UI design. I realized that the market really, really doesn't want that. So then I had to redo my whole portfolio site and make it prettier. But what I did instead is on my new portfolio site, I basically, I just, as you go down you have my case studies, but as you go down the page, I just tell you UX is not UI. Like, I'm more focused on research. Like, I describe that instead of going like, you know, the less visual way. So yes, I do still make things look relatively pretty for my clients. Everything is branded. When I started my consulting business, one of my favorite things to do actually was when I started and you're not actually at the point of being ready to get clients, it was really fun to sit and like think about my branding and put together an entire Pinterest board and do all my color palettes and do all my fonts and I have an entire style guide for Taryn Lambert Consulting that goes into every single piece of thing that I put out. It's, you know, it's on, you'll see it anywhere. So yeah, I still do try to keep that in mind. Oh, the other one is Taryn Lambert Consulting.com. Oh, it's actually /portfolio. Sorry about that. If you're looking to compare those two. And TarynLambert.com is my old portfolio. And when I did my new portfolio, I actually link over to my old portfolio because I was like, I don't have time to move these case studies over. That's the other thing about portfolios. People get really, really like, I don't know, they feel like, oh, I'm going to make this portfolio and then it's going to like stay as my portfolio. And like, I'm not ready to release it to the world. If you go to my portfolio site right now, it literally says in the very top, I've put together a new portfolio site. It's, you know, like it's not done yet. So it's linked over to my old portfolio, but I wasn't going to let perfection stop me. You shouldn't either in your business. You should get things out there and get some user feedback. Like I just leaned into being a UX designer. I was basically like, I haven't finished this, but hey, you haven't finished your product either. Let's be in this together. Yeah, portfolios are the worst part of being a designer. I'm currently working on my portfolio, as I said, and I just put together 2 case studies and like, I need somebody to read them because, oh man, that is such a bad part trying to tell a story, especially when you come from projects that are like really, really messy. And you're like, this wasn't a cute little, you know, end-to-end thing. Let me link that Orchard one before I forget.
Sustainable.
Oops, sorry. Okay. So that's the YouTube video that talks about information architecture and just describes it, if that's interesting to anyone. I think that I don't remember where we are in the questions. So.
Oh, I have one for you.
Okay.
Do you have any advice on addressing a gap in one's resume where one had to attend to personal stuff, life, just this person's applying for their own, or for their first UX research position and they're worried about how to address this?
Yeah, I'd have to see specifically what they were doing before or what they were working on. This is, so something that like, there's a few things that you can do, but it depends on how you want to go about it. There's this idea of not putting specific months on your resume and just putting years, which I've actually like been told to do by a career counselor before. And I felt like it was weird. And then I did it. And then when I would put my resume into applicant software, it would make me put a month anyway. So the whole thing was like, this was dumb to begin with. And for me, it wasn't on brand. I'm such a transparent person that like, it just felt wrong to begin with. You have to figure out like, what is the circumstance and how can I talk about that? And then finding a company that just understands that. There's companies that understand that you're human, and there's companies that think that you're a cog in a wheel. And if you can work for a company that understands that you're human, that's going to be better for you in the long run anyway. So it might actually work to your advantage to have this gap in your resume to be able to talk about it with people. The problem becomes getting past the recruiters or the applicant software system and getting into that interview to be able to talk about it. And I think generally when you're job searching and you're putting resumes into sites, I'm trying to think if I've ever gotten a job that way. I don't think I've ever gotten a job that way. Ryan, Lainey, Chelsea, have you ever gotten a job by putting like a resume into a site? Yeah, let's do a vote for everybody that's on camera. Have you ever like gotten a job by putting a resume onto a site? I'm just curious. Put a thumbs up or thumbs down if you. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, we should all stop doing that because like what a freaking waste of time. Nobody said yes. Okay, so that leads into this point, which is you have to figure out how to start talking to people so that you can get the interview and get around the system. What I've like found often is, and people tell people this all the time, is reaching out to people on LinkedIn, but the way in which you do it needs to be a certain way, right? So you can't like reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and be like, hey, I'm trying to get a job at the company that you work for. Let's talk about it. Like, that's just very aggressive, obviously. it's more of like reaching out to somebody and being like, hey, do you even like working at the company that you're working? Like, ask them a question about themselves, right? And also that helps you, because maybe you shouldn't even pursue it further if they tell you something about the company that isn't compatible with you. And then from there, as you're skipping the system into like, you know, actually being in front of somebody, I think you're more likely to be able to tell your story about why there is a gap in your resume. But I also know that I'm not the best person to answer this question, because I feel like I am currently dealing with a situation where I would love to stop working for a few months because of some health issues. I've been having like a lot of health things for the past year, and it's been really, really difficult to work. I think that having COVID happen was extremely fortunate for me, because I was able to continue to work since everything went remote. But I think that like I'm personally really fearful in some ways of not working in the current climate as it is. I think it's a little bit different than having like a gap in your resume from another time, just because we don't know where things are headed and where everything is going to be in a year, or, you know, 6 months or 2 years. So I'm slightly charged by the question, and I would love to also pass it on to other people.
I'd love to share an actual experience I had that was related to this. I was at a point in my life in 2017 when I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do in general with my life. So I took 3 or 4 months off, and I just went and traveled around and kind of did the whole, let's get away from corporate America for a while. And I was surprised that it was a really positive experience in my interviews. And I know that wasn't a really long time, it wasn't 10 years. But when it came up in my first interview, I remember I like explained it. I was like, yeah, I was doing this thing with my life, and we ended up talking about it. And I noticed that it had such a positive effect on my interviewer that I just started trying to bring it up. And like, because it was a thing for us to talk about that wasn't like, how much money have you made for your company and how many years of experience do you have, and like very cold things. So if you're willing to share some of your life with the interviewer, it can be maybe a really way to build a bridge.
That's awesome. Does anybody else anybody that's here want to share a gap in their resume and kind of how they've dealt with it or their experience?
I can speak about how I'm struggling with that same thing right now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that that's helpful too.
So I had an experience where I left my job 2 years ago, and I left on purpose because there was a lot of things going on. And it's like collecting yourself and how to talk about it so that it doesn't sound like you're a victim, or it doesn't sound like it was a negative situation, I guess. And just, I mean, I've been learning a lot, but I've also been trying to do a lot socially by mentoring other people, like posting articles on Medium, doing things that show that there's like some actionable output, whether you're doing projects or like 100 days of UI or whatever the things are, so that you're like, you have something to show for the time frame. But how to articulate that on the resume is something else entirely. So I would love your feedback on that one if you have any.
I actually saw this guy's feedback or this guy's, I don't know if it was directly on his portfolio. I was on his website, and he had his resume, and then he had a list of courses, and he had documented all of the online courses he had taken over time. And it was really, really impressive because it was consistently, and it was for years. But it was like maybe it was like 4 a year or something. But after like 5 years of consistently like documenting it, it looked really, really impressive. And the thing that like that said to me was like, this person is super, like they are a self-educator, and they're going to continue to educate themselves even, you know, like no matter what job they get hired at, this is just who they are. And they're always going to be like looking for further education. So I think figuring out how to document those things, like whether it's, you could talk about it verbally in an interview to talk about what you're doing, or you can like write out the different things that you've been working on. There's, you know, places that maybe on LinkedIn too, because you're not committed to like one page, that you can put that information in there as well. I think that's a really good advice, Christina. That's awesome. And you reminded me too, like, so just to, I don't know why I'm feeling like all fearful right now of like taking a break when I have quit multiple jobs without a plan. Like, so when I was teaching UX, it got to a point that it was really stressful for me to see students stressing out about their job search. And I was having really serious like insomnia, because I would stay up at night being like, oh my God, is that student going to get a job? Like, I don't know. Like I was taking on too much of their emotion. So I had to quit without, you know, getting another job, because it was just kind of difficult to job search and also teach at the same time, since it was full time. And I, you know, it took me 3 months to get another job, but in that 3 months, it was one of the most impactful 3 months of my life. I went on like a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I mean, it got to like, it just, I wouldn't be the person that I was unless I'd had that experience. So you just gotta move forward and know that like you are supported in some way. And I don't want to get like too spiritual. Maybe it was like the 10-day silent retreat, but like I fundamentally believe that like we are supported by the earth and we are supported by the universe, and like it is going to be okay. So.
All right. Do you want to do another question?
Sure.
Do you have more in you?
No.
Do you want to just do like one more question, or how you feeling?
We can do like 3 more questions.
Okay. When trying to develop additional portfolio pieces, what are some ways you suggest reaching out to find projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think finding things that like you're passionate about is definitely good. And then finding ways in which you can help people. This was during my certificate at UW, but one of my team members reached out to the Washington Trails Association for our information visualization class and was like, hey, we'd love to, you know, help you with your donations and being able to understand the data better. And that was relatively easy for us to get that project. I'm going to be honest, I haven't done a lot of reaching out to places for projects like that. But I think finding a problem that they're having and talking to them about it, and then telling them what it is that you can do for them. I used to, though, reach out to companies for students when I was teaching, and I had to find all the student projects. So that's more of my experience with that. And the way that we went about that is we had a little bit more of a system down where companies applied to us, and then we then shuffled through all the different applicants and decided, and I would talk to all the different companies and figure out exactly what they needed and make sure that it was UX work. So that's the other thing too, is if you're gonna do something for free for your portfolio, make sure it is actually work that is gonna help your portfolio. Same thing goes for talking about anything from all your past roles. Even if you're making the transition into UX, there's gonna be things that you've done in other roles that are relevant to UX, and there's gonna be things that you enjoy doing in other roles. Making sure to talk about those is important, and making sure not to talk about the things that you don't want to do is important too. If your whole resume, like if you had, let's say like, I don't know, like let's say you did a bunch of data entry or something, and you're like, I'm so sick of data entry. Like I literally could not enter like another piece of data into a spreadsheet like for the rest of my life. And your resume says data entry, data entry, data entry. What am I going to hire you for? I'm going to hire you for data entry. So don't put that on your resume. Like only put the things that you want to be hired for on your resume. Yeah.
Cool. I have a suggestion too.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of working on that myself. I am doing 2 different unpaid projects at the moment. And one of those is for a friend. So I just found a friend that was in need of a project, and it's a really fun project. I think it'll be great in my portfolio. So totally fine. I don't mind working for free for a little while. So there's that. And then I also found another group, and I can put this in the in our message board if I think I'm allowed. I'll have to find out. But there's a couple groups on LinkedIn where they're trying to get together different nonprofits that are looking for help in UX. And this one guy is trying to put together like some little teams so that we can kind of establish, like a project together and get that experience working on a team. And he's going to provide mentorship, and he's looking for mentors as well to join and kind of mentor the different groups. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but maybe something to look into. He also said he was willing to look at portfolios or look at like give design feedback if you have designs that you're working on your own and want to get some feedback on those designs. You can set up a time to talk to him. So it might be a cool opportunity. I'll see if I'm allowed to invite people. I think I am, and if so, I can put that information on our group as well.
You're reminding me too that like I am doing those critique sessions next week. So on Tuesday and Thursday, it's on my LinkedIn. If you go to my LinkedIn, and I'll be reposting again about it. I'm going to have I think it's 4 openings each day, but people can also come and watch. I think it's like the first 2 people that sign up, and then I'm going to pick 2 at random. So you just have to fill out a Google form. And those will be next week if you're looking for critiques on your portfolio. That's all I'll be doing next week. So
cool. Yeah, I think there are some questions about portfolios, but maybe that's a good time if they can attend your portfolio.
That's a good idea.
Just because I feel like we could talk for hours about what goes in a portfolio and all of those things. So maybe whoever has some questions more about portfolios, try to attend Taryn's talk on portfolios, or there's some other ones out there too that could be really helpful because there's so much information that we can give on that. It's a lot.
Yeah, that is true.
Let's see here. I don't know if there's more.
Yeah, thank you all for sticking around. I know that we went way over time, but this is awesome to sit and chat with everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it sounds like everyone's really loving hearing all these different tidbits of information you have. So I think it's been super helpful. I've gotten a lot of great information out of it myself. And I think that might be the last questions.
Oh, good. That's super exciting.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. I'm glad to know this is helpful. Sometimes you don't know, because you get to a point where you're like, is this?
This is great. You did really, 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 really great. It was awesome.
Well, thank you for the feedback. I super appreciate it.
Loved it. So I don't know if anyone still wants to stick around for that happy hour networking thing that we wanted to try. It is a little bit late at this point. So I don't know, Ryan, Chelsea, Taryn, do you guys want to keep talking, or should we just try to do that next time?
I will take, go ahead, Ryan.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Taryn.
Oh, I was just going to say, I will take any feedback, positive or negative, in the comments about how you would structure this is the UX designer in me. I'm like, how can we make this better for next time? So if you like the way that it was structured with the activity first and then the talk, or if there was different things that I could have done, or if the timing was off, or if I should actually have this scheduled for a longer session so that everybody can commit it in their schedule for the Q&A. Any of those sorts of feedback would be helpful. And I will link the Google form in the comments as well for that thing on Tuesday and Thursday.
Can you also send me the information, like your whatever you have on LinkedIn about that, so I can post it in our group discussion board?
Yeah, let me find it. And then Ryan, were you trying to say something?
I was just gonna say, why don't we do a poll? Why don't you throw in the chat, I want to hang out, if you want to hang out for a little bit longer, and we'll do breakout rooms. And if not, then we can all filter out at our leisure, and then we'll post that up on the same event page, right, Lene? Is that the plan? All these links that we are getting from Taryn?
Yep. Yeah, I can post all of the links, anything that